All right, you guys said you wanted some more affordable and relatable cars after the Bugatti video on autofocus. So I've actually got a family SUV review for you guys today. So this is the Ferrari Purosangue, and in some ways it's definitively the best performance SUV ever made. And in other ways, it's kind of the worst performance SUV ever made. So if you don't know the story with this car and why it's kind of a big deal in the performance car slash luxury car world, it's because it's Ferrari's first four-door production vehicle, but it technically isn't Ferrari's first four-door car, period. In the 1980s, Ferrari actually collabed with their former design partner Pininfarina to make a one-off concept car called the Ferrari Pinin, so that's technically Ferrari's first four-door car, but it never made it to production, so this is their first real four-door car. But there's your fun fact for the day. But this car represents Ferrari officially entering the performance SUV space, even though they technically don't want you to call this an SUV at all. Ferrari refers to this car as an FUV, but this car is 100% designed to compete with the Lamborghini Urus, the Bentley Bentayga, Rolls-Royce Cullinan, Aston Martin DBX, and so on. The name Purosangue actually translates from Italian to pure blood or pure-blooded, and I really think that name is mostly a clapback to the other performance SUVs out there, because the Lamborghini Urus, the Bentley Bentayga, Rolls-Royce Cullinan, Aston Martin DBX, they're all borrowing engines, chassis components, and other parts from lesser expensive vehicles from other manufacturers. The Ferrari Purosangue is 100% its own thing, using essentially a brand new chassis with an engine made in-house, a tried and true pure blood Ferrari. And for a lot of people, including myself, the engine is the main highlight of this car and what makes the Purosangue so special compared to its competitors. This right here is a 6.5 liter naturally aspirated V12, putting out 725 horsepower and 528 pound-feet of torque, driven to all four wheels via an 8-speed dual clutch automatic. And that right there is all you need to win the performance SUV war on paper. If you've ever heard of Ferrari V12, then you'll know why it's so special to have inside of a family FUV. But if you haven't heard of Ferrari V12, well, yeah, and we will certainly get into how this car drives a little bit later. But first, let's talk about the exterior design and then the interior slash livability, because that's where things get a little funky with this car. But when taking a look at this car in person, at least for me, this definitely does not look like a Mazda CX-5 in front of my eyes in real life. It looks like a very expensive car, and that's mostly because you have carbon all over this car. You've got it on the wheel arches, which is something you haven't seen really on a lot of other cars. You've got it on the side skirts. You've got it on the lower front bumper, the diffuser, the mirror caps. There's so much carbon on the exterior of this car. But then you have Ferrari badges on all four sides of the car, just to remind people that yes, I am a Ferrari, not a Mazda CX-5. It definitely has a design language of its own that makes it stand out from its competitors. The overall shape here is certainly unique. They definitely leaned into the coupe style SUV kind of design aesthetic with this thing. Another fun fact slash observation, at least that I've noticed, is that Ferrari really only ever uses a specific twill pattern for their carbon fiber trim in all of their cars, and that's 1x1 twill, which is different than the twill pattern that BMW, VW, Audi Group, Porsche, they all use in their cars, which is typically 2x2 twill pattern. And that's just one of the ways Ferrari, I guess, likes to separate themselves from all the other manufacturers, using a specific twill pattern for their carbon fiber. They like to be unique, guys. And like I said, you've got a massive carbon fiber diffuser with your quad exhaust tips. That's definitely not something you're gonna see on a CX-5. You can see all these subtle aero elements to the car as well, with air being able to travel through that duct right there. You have airflow cooling down the wheels through this duct right here. There's so many little subtle things that all add up to be a very expensive and performance-focused looking car. And besides all of the aggressive aero elements you've got going on with the car, you'll also see that this car has some fat carbon ceramic brakes with some beefy calipers. And so if you know cars at least a little bit and you see this driving down the road, you'll know that it's something special, even if you don't know that it's the new Ferrari SUV. I was definitely in the middle when seeing this car online and in pictures, but after getting to see it in person, I'm definitely on board with the fact that Ferrari made an actual effort to make this car stand out from the other performance SUVs in this class and still give it design elements that remind you that, hey, this is a Ferrari and not just a cool SUV or FUV. sorry. Okay, random location change, but I figured we would talk about the interior tech livability side of this car. So let's take a look. Oh.
We got a lot to talk about, like here and here and here and here. So I think we should just jump into that.
Yeah, well, I'll hand it off to you, and you can talk about that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay. Come with me into the interior of the Purosangue. Now look, I know these cars aren't necessarily meant for daily, everyday use, but when you do drive it, it's got to have good tech and it's got to be usable. So let's get into that. So Ferrari's been doing this thing for the past couple models. The 296 had this, the SF90 I think also has this, and now the Purosangue, where they just put a ton, actually almost all of the controls, on the steering wheel. And I don't know if I love that, but there are also some other things, like there's a huge screen behind the steering wheel here, there's an HUD, there's a bunch of controls here that actually have a good amount of promise, and then there's a second passenger screen over here. But right from the get-go, your blinkers, your start-stop ignition is on the steering wheel, and then all these other little touchscreen controls, driving controls, windshield wipers, everything else is on these little capacitive buttons and switches on the steering wheel. Like, this has to be some of the most difficult to use UI, UX while driving that I've seen. I do not like it. It's a tiny capacitive D-pad that you can tap the top or bottom of to move around, select in if you want, but then hit the back button there. And then the right and left don't work anymore here. Now you have to swipe to get over to CarPlay or Android Auto. Swiping over, then you get into the settings to move up and down again. It's just, that's crazy, right? I'm not crazy, but if I just go just a few inches over here to the right, suddenly there's a piece of control that I actually do like the mechanics of. So this is your basic HVAC controls and this dial system, right? The basics of this dial, since we do like physical controls while driving, are anytime you want to control something, you just turn the dial and that controls the amount of whatever you're doing. Now you still have to go in on this tiny touchscreen and choose what you want to control, but then the dial changes the amount again. So fan speed, or back out, which parts of the HVAC you want to use. Dial controls the amount. So dial always controls the amount, and then if I ever hit that little eject button at the top, it pops the dial further out to give you a little bit easier controls. And the back seat will be a cooler version of that, so stay tuned for that. But then the rest of the normal HVAC controls are all here. My only regret is that every time you get in this car, it seems to reset the HVAC controls to automatic full blast every time. I think if you asked Ferrari why they do it like this, they would say it's because it's very driver focused, and they'd be right. But I would adjust that to just say it's very driving focused, yes. But there are other things that you still want to have access to, even if you're the driver. For example, there's a screen over here on the side that you can't really even see because of the polarization from the driver's seat, so I gotta get over there. But look, this is not a complaint. This is a car that has wireless Android Auto and CarPlay, and it's got massaging and heated and cooled front seats. It's very comfortable. It's got all the features. I'm just saying, there's other things that you might need to control, like, for example, speakers or radio. And that is a very reflective shirt, so that's my bad for wearing a white shirt today. But anything regarding like the EQ settings or the balance fader for which seat has the best audio, all of that stuff, you just straight up can't seem to do that over here. I've looked for it, I don't see it. You have to do it from the passenger seat. So if you're a driver, you gotta ask your passenger to do that stuff while the display is on. So, something to note. But anyway, now for the first time I get to say, let's check out the back seat of this Ferrari. Because it's weird. There is a lot going on back here. So if you ever see one of these things on the road and you see someone in the back seat, just know that there's a lot going on for that person. First of all, getting in is already unconventional. The handle is up here. You pull that, it unlocks, and it automatically opens up from the back. And you'd be surprised how little effort it actually takes to actually push the door manually, but you look inside and there's 2 seats, no bench seat option at all, so you have to have this 2-seat option. Then if I just hop right in here, you'll see if I'm behind that 6'3" driving position I always talk about, Not bad, not great either. My knees are kind of high and touching the seat in front of me. But then, let me just close myself right in. Actually, no, I won't. I'll just hit this button right here. And that'll close the door, because why would I manually close it? But right away, you have even more interesting back seats. So yeah, there is some amount of forward or backward room. I can move myself forward or backward in this chair, and the controls again are on this dial right here. But you may have noticed that this dial, unlike the one up front, doesn't have a little cutout. So I can't actually grab or control anything here until I hit this eject button, and it pops out, and then I can adjust the dial. So then if I want to do temperature, I can do the dial stuff here, and then I can pop it back in to avoid accidentally controlling things, I guess. Okay, cool. Just a neat way of differentiating and making this a fun Ferrari backseat. This button right here is to control the electrochromic roof. So I don't know if you could tell, but I could change the amount of tint. Oh yeah, you can tell. The amount of tint from that roof that is daylight and that is tinted. So already there's a lot going on. These seats have a wireless charger between them to share, 2 USB-C ports as well in the middle, so they've got wired charging if they want. This little scoop here back it's fine. It's not super useful, but again, it's the backseat of a Ferrari. You're not expecting it to be particularly luxurious. It's a sports utility vehicle, or is it? I don't know. But there is still a trunk, so I'll show you the trunk too. This is actually really easy. I was concerned at first about like this weird movement being a lot, but they did a good job making that lightweight. And these are soft closed doors, so if I go all the way here, it does finish that for me, which is great. Double pane glass. And then at the back, if I want to go and show you guys the trunk, it's not horrible. I could fit golf clubs back here, and the thing about like most SUVs and the seats folding down is you can fit more stuff when you fold the seats down, but this has these 2 big executive seats, so you can pop this top shelf off, and then I'm gonna have to use 2 hands, but I can pinch in from each side here and pull this down. So let me do that. And so now you can't fold these seats down, but you can fit something long ways through the middle of the car. So if you really want to SUV stuff in your Purosangue, you can do that. These controls over here, all they do is move the seats forward or backwards on rails. So if you want more legroom, there you go. Now that's maxed out, and you would feel like you have a little bit more space. So how my knees were touching before, now they're 4 inches back from where they were before. So yeah, you know, that's kind of nice. Close that with that button automatically. This is real SUV stuff. Okay. Also, I don't know if Miles has said this, but I think this is one of the weirdest fitments of any SUV ever made. What is going on with this wheel? This wheel and this arch above the wheel? Like the wheel and then the gap and then the different radius with the carbon thing and then another what? I don't anyway, look, I don't think anybody buying this is pretending that they're getting it for all of the practicality reasons. I just think once you actually buy it, you should still have decent practicality. So I'm giving the front seat with all the buttons on the steering wheel and all the chaos that is these menus, and the fact that your CarPlay and Android Auto only show up right here, I'm giving it like a C, C-. And then all the controls that happen over there that you have to ask your passenger for, and then this working pretty well, but also not always being available. It's a little weird. Back seat, definitely better. Of course, there we go. It's going auto fan control speed again. Back seat, a little better in a Ferrari. Weird thing to say. But people are buying this for the way it drives, right? There's no way this is being purchased for the CarPlay and the features and the storage. It's because it's a Ferrari and you needed an SUV with back seats, but you wanted a Ferrari. So how does it drive?
When I learned that this car was going to have a naturally aspirated V12, that's when I knew it was game over for pretty much all the other performance SUVs. The benefits you're getting with a naturally aspirated motor versus a turbocharged motor, which is a lot more commonplace in performance SUVs, is sound and engine throttle response. This engine revs to 8,250 RPM, and so when you downshift and give it full throttle like this, it simply sounds incredible. The Ferrari V12 is just unmatched in terms of sound. I mean, the Lambo V12, I'd say that's pretty close, but the Ferrari V12 just hits different in a way that's kind of hard to describe. But then you're getting that instantaneous engine throttle response like I mentioned, and so you may not be getting that kick you in the back feeling that you get from a turbocharged motor, but it feels just a lot more satisfying to feel all the power of the engine kick in and start going immediately. I love turbocharged cars, and they're certainly a net positive on automotive society, but I just feel like NA cars are what I've personally always owned, just because they're a lot more fun and satisfying. You really get to earn the power and work your way up through the gears in a way that's just like satisfying and not leaving you wanting more, like all these super crazy fast turbocharged cars are known to do. And so this is really the first performance SUV that's offering that truly satisfying feeling of earning that power and working your way up through the gears, that instantaneous engine throttle response. This is the first performance SUV that's offering an experience like this in like well over 15 years. All right, we're gonna give it a go with a launch control. So I've got my recorder ready, performance start. It definitely bogged. I'm not sure if I'm getting the right settings. All I know is I'm putting it in performance start, flooring the brake, flooring the accelerator, letting go of the brake. I've got a 4.1 and I've been consistently getting 4.1s in this car, so I don't know, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but that's still not bad given the conditions. These are not the best tires you can get for these cars, these Bridgestones that I've got on there currently, and the ground is a little damp, but I know this car can do better. It can almost do a full second better, but for whatever reason, we're not quite being able to get that here. The launch just isn't giving me what I want as far as throttle. The handling in this car is also top tier, and that's because Ferrari's using some pretty interesting tech to make it all happen. So this car has rear wheel steering, which is pretty common for a lot of high-end performance cars nowadays. But unlike a lot of traditional systems that are using both rear wheels and turning them in synchronization, the Ferrari system allows for individual steering of the rear wheels, which will allow for one wheel to remain center and ready to counter steer if you need it, which makes this car super confident in the corners, which is something you want when lugging around a 4,800 plus pound SUV, or FUV. Sorry, keep forgetting. Ferrari's suspension system almost completely eliminates the idea of body roll as well, which is kind of crazy to think about in a car that weighs nearly 5,000 pounds. So a lot of high-end supercars and sports cars use hydraulic suspension systems that will essentially push it up and down on one corner of the car to remain planted when taking a corner. So if I take a tight corner to the left, the hydraulic system is going to push down on the right side of the car to make the car feel as planted as physically possible. And so Ferrari's using a very similar setup, but instead of hydraulics, they're using electric motors to push down on one side of the car to make it feel as planted as possible and take corners with the utmost confidence, which is pretty cool. Most of the power is being sent to the rear when driving this car, and so you have somewhat of an on-demand all-wheel drive system to make sure you have optimal traction at all times. But that rear wheel bias definitely adds to the fun and agility factor when driving this car. It handles not only well, but in a way that's just satisfying. And when getting to stretch its legs on a dynamic piece of road, it's just a boatload of fun. Quite honestly, much more fun than any other performance SUV I've tested. And because this is a front mid-engine car, meaning the engine is in the front of the car but behind the rear axle, you've got nearly a 50-50 weight distribution, which definitely adds to the handling balance and overall agility of the car. It's just such an incredibly well done SUV in terms of how it drives. I'm sorry, FUV. I keep saying SUV. It's an FUV. I'm sorry, Ferrari. If we're going to talk downsides with this car, I guess one of them is technically the sound. Now, I already talked about how it sounds good, right? The engine obviously sounds fantastic, but it just feels a little muted. I feel like it could be about 10 or 15% louder. Now, granted, I'm a young and goofy boy, so loud and obnoxious, but good sounding engines is what I live for. And this may not necessarily be the kind of car for a person who wants to hear everything going on under the hood, but if you got a naturally aspirated Ferrari V12, I feel like it's just the right thing to do, you know? And to my surprise, you've actually got double pane window glass all around. So when the windows aren't down, it definitely feels a little muted in this car. So most of my driving when I really want to hear the engine has been with the windows down, even when I would probably benefit from having the AC fully circulating around the cabin. But either way, I feel like, you know, Ferrari may be thinking that this is a car that's going to be sold to someone who may already have 2 or 3 Ferraris that are as loud as one could possibly want from the factory, right? And so for that person who already has their super loud car and doesn't need their SUV to have that experience as well, I feel like this makes perfect sense. But if you're someone like me who just wants all of their cars to provide as much sensation as humanly possible, I feel like it's just a little bit too quiet for me. But that's really just subjective, you know? Another potential negative for passengers might be the transmission. Now, Ferrari, in my opinion, probably has the best dual clutch transmission setup, not because of the responsiveness alone, but just because of how involved it feels. It's like your favorite hat store. It's just always giving you that snapback. But for people in the passenger seat, sorry, I had to get red line there. For people in the passenger seat, it may be a bit too involved, you know what I'm saying? So, for example, I had my girlfriend in the passenger seat on the first day I had the car, and I was doing a lot of 2-to-1 downshifts around town when coming to a stop, and they were quite aggressive. Definitely in a way that I personally enjoyed, but her, not so much. In fact, she said she felt like she needed to wear a helmet in the car, not because of how fast I was going, just because of how aggressive those downshifts were when coming to a stop and kind of feeling the whole car kind of shake like this. It can be a little bit much for a passenger who isn't looking for a super involved driving experience all the time. But if you're a super gentle driver who's just going to leave it in automatic all the time, then this is a total non-issue at all. But if you want to drive spirited with other people in the car, it may be a bit of a complaint. But this is honestly nitpicking, and the fact that that's one of the few complaints I can find with the driving experience for this car just speaks to how freaking good it is. This car just, I'm totally glad that this car exists, not because I'll ever be able to afford to buy one day, but just because of how I feel like other manufacturers are going to respond to this car. I feel like this car has totally set a new benchmark for how an SUV can handle, how it can perform, how it can sound. And so maybe the next generation or next iteration of whatever the Lamborghini Urus is going to be, maybe that will be a lot better than what we've got now. Not that that's a bad car by any means, but you know, you could pretty much tune an Audi RSQ8 and have the exact same experience. There is no other SUV that's going to give you this experience. And that's why the Purosangue is so special. Oh, those downshifts. All right. Pretty much out of gas, so I think that's where we'll end it. The Ferrari Purosangue, if anything, has set a new benchmark for the performance SUV class and really shown me how rewarding it can be to build your performance SUV from the ground up. It truly is the most fun performance SUV to drive of all time, probably, but that comes at an eye-watering cost. Not to mention the software, infotainment, livability of this car in certain aspects just isn't that great for me. But if you can look past all of those things, then this is an absolute must cop if you can, because I'm pretty sure these are all sold out for like the next couple of years. But that's about it. Shout out to Ferrari for letting us borrow this for a couple of days. And if you want to see more crazy car stuff like this, definitely subscribe, because August is going to be pretty wild over here. All right, that's it. Talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.